This is Emily here with 3D Printing Canada, and today I'm going to show you how to make 3D models from free software like Paint 3D. Paint 3D is a program that comes pre-installed on like every Windows computer. You probably have it yourself if you do have a Windows computer, and I found recently that it's handy for making 3D objects. And so what I did with this guy is I took a picture of a flamingo and I traced him in Paint 3D to get the general shape of the mesh. And then afterwards I imported him into Blender and added some more details. Well, I should probably address that the flamingo doesn't have a face. The print didn't turn out perfectly, but the idea was to have the flamingo's head here and the beak coming down, and to ideally print it without supports, but as you'll be able to see in the time-lapse, it didn't quite come out perfectly.
So for this little project, I'm going back to Pixabay, which is my preferred source of royalty-free images. And I'm looking for a flamingo that I think would work well to trace. So after looking through a few, I ultimately decide on this one that I like. This one here. So it's just a regular JPEG image. And next I'm going to open up Paint 3D, which should be a familiar program for any PC users out there. It's the one that comes pre-installed and has replaced old-fashioned Paint. So going into Paint 3D, I start a new project and then I can import from there the picture I chose. So it brings it in, and from there you can go to 3D shapes. And this neat feature I found is the soft edge 3D Doodle, which essentially you can use to trace your picture like I'm doing here, and it will convert your doodle into a 3D mesh. So I decided that this flamingo picture would be good for reference, and you can see my dotted line go around it. You might need to full screen the video if you're having trouble seeing. But the general idea of this is you can trace a picture and create a 3D object. And I guess it would follow that the better you are at tracing, the better your object will look. I had a bit of trouble with this one, and it took me a couple tries, but I'm almost done tracing this guy's face, so I will show you what happens. Once you reach your mouse back to your original point, it changes automatically to transforming your doodle. And voila, you've got an object. Now, I've never seen a blue flamingo, so the first thing I'm going to do is edit the color and make it flamingo pink. So with the resulting 3D mesh, you can turn it around or rotate it however you like, which really shows you that it's more than a 2D image you've created. So in my case, I'm going to rotate mine, and that's looking like a skinny flamingo, so I'm going to fatten him up a bit here. Can make him taller. Oops, I undid that, so I thought I went a little too far with it. And I don't want to compromise my mesh too much. I generally like this flamingo-like shape I've got here, and I think I can think I can do some good with it. So after I have my basic mesh that I've drawn up in Paint 3D, the first step I'm going to take towards making this a 3D printable model is importing it into 3D Builder, which is another free program available for Windows PC users. I believe it's made by Microsoft, and it's one that I like. So I imported the object, and what I want to do here is, as it is now, it does not have a flat bottom, and I just want to chop off the bottom so that it sits flat on the print bed and will have more chance of succeeding. So in order to get a flat bottomed print, I'm going to use 3D Builder's split tool. So that's under the Edit tab of 3D Builder. You can choose split, and here's where you have an option to either keep top or keep bottom. In my case, I'm keeping the top of the model and chopping the bottom off. And then once I have it where I want, I can click split. Now we don't want to cut too much off. So let me see here. That's what it would look like if I keep the bottom. So sometimes I just click that button to check how much I'm chopping off. But ultimately we want to keep the top of this flamingo, of course. And I click split. Now it settles nicely. Clicking settle pretty much shows how it would, well, settle once, with weight and everything. Another great feature of this 3D Builder program is it can repair models that other programs might think are okay, but your slicer can have trouble with. Alright. Now I've got my general flamingo shape. This is turning out pretty well. The third and final free software that I'm going to use for this flamingo project here is Blender. It's by far the most complicated of the three I've used so far in this project. Well, it's the most complicated of any 3D modeling softwares I've used so far actually, but I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of it. So what I'm planning on doing in Blender here is just carving out some of those more fine details. Starting with giving this flamingo bird some eyes. Now I'm going to try a couple things and undo a couple times probably, but I'm just experimenting to see what works for me. At first I have the draw tool. And you can adjust the radius for how big that is. Zoom out. That doesn't look too bad. I think I'll stick with that. Okay. And especially with sculpting, it's always good to have a reference image close by. So that's what I'll do here. I'm going to bring up the same flamingo picture that this 3D model is based on. So here's my picture of a flamingo, and here's my sculpture of a flamingo. And my goal now is to try to make them look a little bit more alike. Now I'm still pretty new at all this sculpting stuff, so it won't be picture perfect, but I'm hoping to make something cute. Cute enough for a flamingo fanatic to enjoy. The next detail I'd really like to carve out is the beak. So I'm using the Draw Sharp tool in Blender next. Unfortunately with Blender, especially if you don't exactly know what you're doing, crashing the software is likely, so it's important to save often. So I'm carving out a little flamingo mouth here. Comparing it to my picture. Ooh, not quite good enough, so I press the undo button on my keyboard, just your standard Control-Z, and I'm going to try that again till I get something I'm happy with. I should note I have the symmetry turned on for the sculpting right now, so automatically when I make a change to one side of the flamingo, it makes the identical change on the other side of the x-axis. So now I've got a flamingo with eyeballs and a mouth, starting to become anatomically correct. My next challenge will be trying to add a bit of detail into the feathers. So the great thing about these digital softwares is you can always undo things if you end up not liking the direction things go. So here I'm just going to experiment a little bit and see what I ultimately like best for creating wings for this guy here. Playing with the Draw Sharp tool a bit, which, you know, could give a simple look like that. Not bad, but I'm going to see what else I can do. Undo that. This one unintentionally ended up looking like a hand, a thumb and 5 fingers, but not quite what I'm after either. But it's good to experiment. Okay, comparing my reference photo to my 3D object that I've created to this point, I am going to try to give this bad boy some wings. To do this, I chose the Sculpt Draw tool, which is pretty standard. I cranked up the radius a bit, and I just built on to each side, so it's like there's physically a wing sticking out. Give it more dimension. After I had it properly inflated, I guess, I changed to the Draw Sharp tool to give it a bit more definition. I'm liking how that's looking. Now I just want a little more detail in the wings. Okay, at this point I decided I'd be alright with a cartoonish flamingo. So I just did a quick little Google search for cartoonish flamingos to see what their wings look like to apply to my own artwork here, if you can call it that. And that's how I came up with this fairly simple design. Now the feathers have some detail. And I can undo it and redo it as many times as I want until it's just how I would like it to be. I'm using the pinch tool, which admittedly I don't really know how to use, so I'm going to undo that. Just experimenting some. Once I've got all of my details sculpted as I like, I'm going to export this Blender project as something that is more 3D printable. So to do this, I'm going to File, Export, and here you can choose .obj, .stl, well, pretty much any 3D file format, but for this instance, I'm choosing .obj. Now that I have it as a 3D object, a .obj file, I'm going to import it back into 3D Builder to make a bit of further changes. Okay, so back into 3D Builder here. I'm going to import my newly sculpted flamingo object. Here's my flamingo sculpt I'm importing. I'm going to have to change the orientation here. Import model. I can select it, click rotation at the bottom of the screen, and I'm changing the roll rotation by 90 degrees in this instance. I'm using a drawing tablet, so I'm just writing it in. Then you can go to Object Settle for quick and easy getting it on the ground, or what would be the build plate in a 3D printing circumstance. Here I decided that my flamingo was a little too wide, so I let it slim up a bit. But here's my flamingo shaped object. Okay, so we've got our pretty flamingo-shaped mesh here, but you know what I think would be even better? If we could make it practical. Because nothing better than 3D printing something that's not only pretty, but also practical, in my very humble opinion. So to do that, I'm going to add another shape that we will ultimately subtract from the first mesh. So I am hoping to turn this flamingo sculpture into a flamingo planter. And right now I'm looking at the Insert Custom Shape menu, and the shape I'm deciding on is a cone. I have plans to adjust this shape. You can adjust numbers such as longitude, latitude, division, radius. You have a lot of control over what this ultimately becomes. And if you don't know what the numbers do, just enter random numbers and see what happens when you go bigger or smaller. Sometimes that's the best way to learn. So I'm going to rotate this cone here, good 180 degrees. And this is not the exact shape I'm planning on subtracting from my flamingo here. I just wanted something that was wider at the top than it was at the base, So I found that a good way to do that is to make a cone and then modify it. So I'm going to go to the Edit tab and use the split function to get a shape that I want. Alright, and this is the shape that I'm going to subtract from the flamingo, keep in mind. And the color doesn't really matter, but I changed mine black just for illustrative purposes, I guess. Now I'm going to line it all up and go from there. So I'm lowering this object into my flamingo. Once I have it about where I think it needs to be, and I know it's lined up because both the flamingo and this former cone shape I've got on the same axis. I can transform it as I like. I decided to make it a bit longer since it's kind of got a long body. Lower it in. Okay. And right now these are two solid shapes combined together, but you can check the X-ray view to see how it intersects. And once I establish that that looks pretty good to me, I just don't want it going too deep because, you know, I want it to be a planter, so I want there to be a bottom. And I can make my fine adjustments here. I like the X-ray view for being able to see inside things, of course, that's what it does. Just playing around with resizing my shape here, but ultimately I think about that is what I'm going to go to. Now under the Edit tab, Subtract is what I clicked here to, well, subtract the second shape from the first. And because I colored it black, anywhere it was touching the pink flamingo is now also black, you know, which is interesting for illustrative purposes. If I click undo, it's back there, and I can make adjustments. Maybe not as long. And when I have this object selected, that's when I can press subtract, and it subtracts it from the other object which is not selected. In this case, the flamingo. And with that, I would call that a flamingo planter. Okay, after a few resizings, this is what I settle on. Subtracting this shape from the flamingo gives me a pretty nice looking planter in my opinion. Yeah, I like that. Alright, time to slice it up and 3D print it.
So even though this guy didn't come out perfectly, it's good for demonstrating the idea of how easy it is to trace an image and bring it to life in 3D. Thanks for watching. This has been Emily with 3D Printing Canada, and if there's anything you want to see me design and print, let us know in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe for more.